Hey everyone, I'm John with Boardroom Gaming. I'm here today to talk through the setup and playthrough of Reef. This is a game that we picked up at Dice Tower Con 2018 and we immediately fell in love with it. It's a great abstract strategy game where you're trying to build up your coral reef with these nice clunky coral pieces here. You're going to be playing them on a grid based on some cards that you draw out of a card pool, and the player at the end of the game with the most points wins. It's pretty simple. Let's get into the setup and gameplay and we'll go from there. All right, so now that you've opened your box, you opened all the bags, you punched out all the pieces, we're going to get right into setting up the game. And we're going to start by separating those coral pieces into piles based on their color. This changes depending on the number of players. We'll be doing a 2-player game, which is going to use 18 coral pieces. If you're doing a 3-player game, there'd be 24, and if there was a 4-player game, you'd be using all 28. Once you've got all your coral pieces separated, the next step is going to be separating those point markers. You're just going to make them into piles of 20, 10, 5, 3, and 1. And then each player is going to start with 3 initial points. Next up is shuffling the 60 card deck, so give that a good shuffle. You'll deal each player 2 cards face down, which will be their starting hand. No other players are going to see it. And then just set the deck off to the side. Next step is going to be handing out the player boards, and you'll use the same number of player boards that there are players. So if you're having a 2-player game, you'll use 2 boards. 3 players, 3 boards. 4 players, 4 boards. You do want to make sure that the board with the starfish in the corner is in play. That determines who the first player is to start the game. Once each player has their player board, they're going to set their initial coral pieces, 1 from each pile, into the 4 center spaces on their player board. There is an alternate setup at this point. If you're more familiar with the game and you wanted to set it up a little differently, you could put your coral pieces anywhere but the 4 center tiles, and you could even stack them if you wanted to. For the first few games, it's recommended that you use the beginning setup where you put them all in the center tiles. Once your boards are set up, we're going to go back to that deck of cards. You're going to flip it over so that they're all laying face up. You're going to deal out the top 3, and that's going to be your starting card pool for the game. Alright, so we got our game set up. We got our player board with the first player marker down here. There's that little starfish. We got 1 of each of our corals. We got our starting hand of 2 cards, our 1, 2, 3 points, and our card pool of cards. Before we get into each turn, I want to talk through the cards really quick just to make sure you understand how they work. They're pretty simple. They're split into 2 sections. So you can see up here there's a top part in white and then there's bottom part in blue. The top part just tells you how many coral pieces you're going to take in place, and you have to do them in order. So you do the top first, then the bottom. So you're going to draw your coral. So in this case, I would take 2 coral, and I would place them on my board however I wanted to. The only rules you have to kind of take into consideration are you can't have more than a stack of 4 high on your board. Other than that, you can place them however you want to. After you place your coral, you're going to do the bottom portion, which is how you score your points. So this is the pattern you want to match. In this case, I would get 4 points, the number here in the white circle. I get 4 points for each diagonal set of purple, set of 3, I should say. So anywhere that I see a pattern like this on my board, 1, 2, 3, I would get 4 points. You don't count any of your coral twice. So if you had some overlap, however that would fit on the board, you would only count your coral once, and it doesn't have to just go this direction. It can go either direction on your board. There's a couple other cards that look a little bit different than the basic cards. So this card here, stay there. This card here just says you would find your highest stack of red coral, and you would get 2 points for every green touching that highest stack. So I mentioned earlier before that you can have a stack up to 4 high. So you would just find whatever that stack of red is, that's the highest. And if you have a tie, you would just pick one. And for any green coral touching that red stack, you would get 2 points. So you have the potential to get 3, 6, 8, 16 points for this one card. And then this last part, or this last, well, not really last card, I guess we can talk about the one next to it. This card, you'll see a little number on some of the corals. That just tells you how high up it has to be to score. So this one, you would be able to get 3 points for each different color that you had in the 4th position. So you would max out that stack of coral, and then you would get 3 points for the color that's on top of it. This one works the same way. So this one you would need 2 yellows next to each other at a height of 2. So anywhere you had, so I just put all these just as an example. So you're only going to be able to score these twice, right? So you either get 5 points for this one and 5 points for this one, or you would get 5 points for this one and 5 points for this one. You wouldn't keep going around in circles and get 20 points for this card. That's how the cards are read, and you kind of need to understand that so that you know when you're drawing cards how you want to draw them, because you have to plan for the future and how you're going to play those cards. So drawing cards, you have your choice of any of the cards out here, any of the 4 facing up. These 3 you can take for free. You just pick it up, put it in your hand. If you wanted to take the card off of the top of the deck, you would have to pay a point out of your own point pool, and you would put it on the lowest scoring card in the display. So it would go on this card, and then this card would come into my hand. The other action that you have is to play a card. To play a card, you take one of the cards that's in your hand and you put it into your discard pile, which will be somewhere next to your board. And again, like I mentioned before, you're going to perform the 2 actions. So the first one is going to be laying these 2 red coral pieces anywhere on the board, as long as it's not a stack of 4. And the second part would be scoring 4 points for anywhere that you have purple coral looking from the top down. Keep in mind it's top down. You can't look in the middle of your coral and say, well, I would have had it here. It's anything that's on the top level that makes this L shape here. And it can be turned any way. Just make sure you don't count any of those coral pieces twice. You only count them once. You keep going through rounds back and forth through all your players. Once you're done, it goes to the player to the left. And then the game ends when either one of the piles of coral are depleted, or when there's no more cards to draw out of the deck. So this isn't one of those games where you're going to take your discard pile and shuffle it in. Once these cards are gone, they're gone. And once these pieces of coral, once one of those colors is gone, the game is over. So that's a pretty quick explanation of Reef. This game is 2 to 4 players, 30 to 45 minutes. Like I said before, this is a game that we really like a lot. It's probably going to get a lot of play here at our table. Hopefully you enjoyed it as well. If you did, let me know in the comments below. Be sure to like and subscribe. If there's any other content you'd like to see or games you want to hear about, let me know in the comments. And until next time, happy gaming.